Now, he's probably more used to being behind a camera or in a cutting room, but last week the American film producer and director Kelly Duda was called in front of the independent public inquiry into how the NHS gave thousands of haemophiliacs contaminated blood during the 1970s and 80s. More than 4,800 haemophiliacs contracted hepatitis C and 1,200 of them got HIV as well. More than 1,700 have died. But contaminated blood products were not just supplied to the UK, Canada and Japan received them too. Duda's film, Factor 8, the Arkansas prison blood scandal, centres on Cummins Prison in Arkansas, where in the 1970s and 80s, prisoners were allowed to donate blood for money, a practice known as bleeding in the States. Many of the donors were infected with hepatitis C and HIV. Karen Hoggan talked to Kelly Duda and watched the film, which includes the reactions of many of the victims.
Michael McCarthy is a Canadian hemophiliac infected with the liver-debilitating disease hepatitis C. During the time he was using Factor 8, he had no idea it was made with prisoners' blood from the U.S.
I would have stopped playing sports. I would have iced my bleeds. I was able to stop taking product for 9 years after it became apparent that the stuff was too dangerous. So I could have avoided my infection if I would have been warned. I would have taken the consequences of having a crippled joint over a fatal disease. Nobody gave me that opportunity to make that decision. My decision was made by a blood broker in Montreal, by a pharmaceutical company that had corporate interests above mine, and by a government in Arkansas that decided that this money was too good to shut down something so dangerous. And that is, since it wasn't being given to our own people, who cares about Canadians?
John Plater is an attorney and the vice president of the Canadian Hemophilia Society. He, too, is a prison plasma, AIDS, and hepatitis C victim.
The public as a whole will start to recognize the implications this has, not for some other group of, high-use blood recipients like hemophiliacs. It's not some other group. It's each and every one of us, because each and every one of us can be exposed to the reality that we or a loved one is going to need a blood transfusion.
You've been giving evidence to the independent inquiry in the UK. What kind of questions have they been asking you?
Well, they want me to illuminate what was the U.S. situation. I guess they want the details of the environment and what was going on in the prisons, and why I believe that this was harmful. I think they just want me to discuss some of the things that I found out in my film. For sick people in the U.S. and Canada who needed blood, a prisoner was their worst nightmare. For a $2 bleed fee, Arkansas inmates running the blood program would let any inmate give blood, even if they were drug abusers, even if they were part of the prison sex ring, even if they had AIDS. John Schock has hepatitis C and was a frequent bleeder in the Cummins plasma program during the 70s. In 1989, he received a liver transplant.
The plasma program that they had was pretty shoddy. They had inmates doing things they shouldn't have been doing, like sticking people, taking their blood. They had inmates spinning the blood for the plasma.
Haziel Earl, a Cummins prisoner from 1979 to 1994, quit working in the plasma program as a blood spinner because he witnessed inmates whom he knew to be infected giving blood on a regular basis.
Yeah, whether you had a disease or whether you was HIV positive or whether you was hepatitis B positive, whatever nature was, you could bleed. Yes, drug users was also allowed to bleed. People that shot up different type of drugs such as cocaine, methamphetamine drugs, any type of pills they could get. Drug addicts was allowed to bleed.
Now, how do you know this? Did you know these people, or?
How did I know it? Because I lived amongst them. I lived amongst the people in the barracks, and most of them I participated with because we only had a space of 3 feet between us from bed to bed. And you could see everything that go on. You could see these same people shooting drugs and then going over to the blood bank and bleed.
This is a risky population. These coagulation products were not virally deactivated. So any disease that's in that plasma and is pooled then can be spread to any recipient in a number of thousands. One bad, unit, or a few units of poisonous blood could contaminate this giant vat, where they would have maybe up to 20,000 donors, and then wherever that went, spread the disease, HIV, hepatitis C, what have you.
Why were the prisons allowing the prisoners to sell their blood or make money out of selling their blood? Why was that in the interests of the prisons?
Well, in Arkansas, it was so that the state could make money. It was under the guise of benefiting the inmates, but they made a few dollars per donation, not green money, because that's considered contraband, but what they called scrip, or coupons, that they could use at the commissary to purchase toiletries, cigarettes, Coca-Cola, things like this. But we must keep in mind that the state was making its cut off of this.
The scandal broke on September 11th, 1998, with documents I had dug up. Newspaper readers in parts of the U.S. and Canada woke up to front-page headlines reporting on a major public health disaster. For years, Canada had been unknowingly importing plasma from one of America's worst prisons. For a week, the story looked like it would be big news. Investigations were promised. Politicians said they would get to the bottom of it. Then nothing happened. There were still many questions that needed to be answered. How dangerous was the blood from the Arkansas prisons? The blood program passed numerous FDA inspections, and prison officials assured the public that only healthy, disease-free prisoners had bled. Was Bill Clinton involved? As governor, he had direct control over Arkansas's prisons. He had appointed friends and associates to oversee the blood program. Did he know of the abuses? Who besides Canadians were infected? Did bad blood go elsewhere? But these questions were never answered. The U.S. press quickly lost interest and moved on. It seemed as if I was the only person left to tell this story, and what I found was shocking.
So it's hard to get prison inmates to talk to you. How about people who worked for the prison system?
It's the same thing. They feel like they just have as much to lose. But of course, I was able to speak to former prison officials, former medical workers, and government officials, federal and state.
And what kind of things were they telling you?
The people that represent the prison system, the authorities, say nothing bad ever happened, and still sort of maintain that there's no difference between a prisoner's blood and somebody in the outside world, that's actually discriminatory. I was able to speak to the medical administrator there, a man by the name of John Bias.
Kelly, we're no different than the center downtown and the center in big cities that are still functioning. What makes us different? I mean, your question begs that there's some expectation that we have to be concerned about something. We're no different than they are. They're concerned about staying in business.
Dr. Francis Bud Henderson was the director and founder of HMA, Health Management Associates, the company responsible for at least 7 years of plasma shipments to Canada from the Arkansas Department of Correction.
Anyone who had admitted to IV drug use were excluded. And although in most prisons, the inmates can get almost anything they want, but that's extremely limited access.
How come you got so involved with this issue?
I wasn't looking to do a documentary. I wasn't looking to investigate this. I didn't want to have anything to do with this, really. I mean, it wasn't my cup of tea. But the more I looked into it, the more I found, the more it just sort of branched out, and it grabbed me. And then I knew that there were people that were hurt, and on both sides. The prisons were just as exploited as these tainted blood victims. And I began to see that if I didn't do something, nothing would be told.
It's almost impossible, I imagine, to hear this story without being moved. Just how hard was it to remain detached when you were making the film?
If I had remained detached, the film would have never gotten made. I've had to go through so many hardships, so many hoops. Reporters are not supposed to have to hurt. And yet I've experienced a great deal of my own hurt. I've been punished, if you will, for doing this. But this is not about me, and anything I felt was slim compared to the victims. And so at a certain point, I mean, it's because I felt that it was the right thing to do that I kept doing it. It's so tragic what's happened to these people. I mean, you know, they start out with a disease called hemophilia that they're plagued with, and then to be given these deadly diseases.
James Krepner, a Canadian lawyer, is another hemophiliac infected with hepatitis C and AIDS from tainted blood products.
It really drives home the fact that you may be close to death. And I guess the other thing that makes you very scared is you watch your friends die. And that brings it home as well, that this isn't just some esoteric intellectual issue. This is real and people are dying around you.
I mean, some people say, oh, it's very Michael Moore-ish, and it's not, because there's no humor in people dying from tainted blood, but I am your guide, so I narrate it, and it's an investigative piece of me trying to dig up, talk to inmates, dig up information from officials and records, and then at a certain point trying to find, you know, how could something like this happen here? I deal with the information, but I try to be very careful and let viewers decide. I don't preach. I'm just trying to lay it out there for you to see for yourself, and you can make the judgment. But I just want you to be informed. I don't pretend to know the truth. I don't pretend to represent the truth. What I am trying to do is have an honest and sincere examination and pursuit of the truth.
How did you fund the making of the film?
It was all privately funded. And,
your own money?
Yeah, and then other friends. If I had known in the beginning what all I was going to have to go through, I probably wouldn't have done it. But then that's kind of life. But I didn't stop. Every time a door was closed, every time something, I mean, my wife left me with this film. I mean, you know, I had friends that betrayed me. You know, I felt like a character in my old B movie at times. So you say, I don't need this. But then at a certain point, you know, my character says, to hell with that. I'm doing the right thing, I feel. Why are people trying to stop me from doing this?
Why did your wife leave you?
Well, I think partly she was afraid.
Afraid of what?
Afraid of what would happen to us. There were a lot of scary things going on.
Like what?
My tires slashed, my house broken into. I had odd things. You know, some of them you don't want to be paranoid as a journalist, because that's not going to help clarify things. But, you know, certain things that there's no question had to be connected to what it was I was doing.
What do you think you've accomplished?
Well, that is ongoing, I guess. I think what I want to do and what I'll be able to do may be two different things. I just want people to understand what happened. I want to spread the word. I want to inform the public. Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, being at this inquiry gave me an opportunity to do that. But also, I want to be able to stop bad things from happening again. Now,
the fact is, though, that this inquiry, the one that you've been giving evidence to, is actually an independent inquiry. It's independently funded. It has no powers to compel people to give evidence or to produce documents. Do you think that's good enough?
No, it's not good enough. There should be a government inquiry, and hopefully this will lead to such. I mean, Scotland's looking at this now finally after turning it down twice. The British people need to realize that they don't know what's all going on, and this isn't just an issue about people who were you know, using blood products. I mean, in America at least, I don't know what the statistics are here, but 1 in 4 persons will need a blood transfusion in his or her life. So it's an issue about blood safety, but it's also about accountability. It's also about what's going on. And so, I mean, you need to know, you need to make folks in your government accountable, because people were hurt. They died, and they're still dying, and they need answers, and they're owed those answers.
Filmmaker Kelly Duda, and we will, of course, be